fitness equipment, exercise equipment, or read up on a diet? Okay, yeah, that's most of us, right? Like, yeah, you've maybe purchased a treadmill or some weights or a jump rope, right? Maybe you've read up on keto or fasting or all sorts of different things that float around out there. And when that happened, like, I remember, like, purchasing a weight bench and being like, I feel accomplished. I just purchased a weight bench. Not a lot of, like, this is a good one. It goes up and down, and it's got some tension straps in it, and I was excited, right? I'm like, okay. At that moment, I felt accomplished, but had I accomplished, was I more fit? No, I purchased a piece of equipment. I even unpacked it. I studied it. I looked at all of its components, but I was not more fit because I had not yet applied the piece of equipment that I had purchased. And the same goes for following Jesus. Our hope is that we not only read it, but do what it says. That we not only read the words of Jesus and read the words that have been left for us, but that we do what it says. We apply it. Because application makes all the difference. So we've talked about confession and forgiveness. We've talked about encouragements, that encouraging one another is important. And last week we talked about rest. How many of you avoided your phone before bedtime? Oh, there's a few. Okay, all right. So like last week, we challenged you, like, avoid your phone right before bed, and maybe even right after you get up. Just kind of leave it alone. Like, decide there's a space in time that your phone is just off limits. And then take a 24-hour Sabbath, like all 24 hours, right? And we challenged us to do different things, to apply some of these things, right? So we are going to jump into today's topic. And today's topic is one of those things that it applies at work. And it applies with your family that are coming out or are already out for Thanksgiving. And it applies with your kids, if you've got kids. And this even applies with your neighbors. It applies with every single relationship that you have is affected by this one life app today. And that's the life app of trust. I'm going to talk about trust today because your relationships are no stronger than the amount of trust you have in those relationships. Does that make sense? Your relationships are no stronger than the amount of trust you have in those relationships. So your marriage is no stronger than the amount of trust you have in your marriage, your relationship with your kids, your relationship at work. All of these rise and fall on the amount of trust that we have with one another. And we spent 5 weeks in the series previous to this talking about our trust in God. And this isn't like, now, I'm going to try it. We're not going to talk about growing our trust in God. I want to talk about your trust in people today. Your trust in one another. And two things really make it difficult to trust. Two things make it difficult for us to trust other people. And what makes it difficult to trust are what you experience and what you expect. Okay? What you experience and what you expect. Those two things. What you experience, if someone said, hey, Mom, Dad, I'm going to be home at 8, and they were home at 10, and you experience that, it makes it difficult to trust, correct? That experience has made it harder to trust that, well, the next time they tell me that they're going to be home at 8, and then how am I going to trust that they're going to be home at 8? Experience can make it difficult to trust. But even maybe more so than experience, one of the things that makes it difficult for us to trust is really kind of who we are. It's our expectations. And some of them are stated, some of them for us are just kind of built into our lives. Expectations, we all have it. And sometimes our expectations are deep. Sometimes they're tied into the home we grew up in. Some of us grew up in a home that wasn't safe. And that makes it very challenging to trust. Some of us grew up in a broken situation, or some of us have had traumatic events that make it difficult to trust. And so I want to just kind of at the front say, yeah, I know we're starting into challenging territory. Because some of us have an easier time trusting, some of us have a harder time trusting. It's part of being human. It's part of our different varied experiences. But as a follower of Jesus, if you're a follower of Jesus here today, this is a harder message. Because I think this is probably where, like, in certain ways, we're called to something a little bit further, a little bit more than someone that has not yet decided to follow Jesus. Because I think Christians are actually called to relate to one another and to people in general through trust. We're called to relate from a position of trust. In fact, we're going to look at what I think it might be the most well-known. Well, it's probably not the most well-known, but it's at least in the top 3 well-known texts that whether you're a Christian or not, you've probably heard this. Maybe you were at a wedding and it was read. Because we're going to jump into Corinthians 13, which is the what chapter? The love chapter, right? Right? So this often gets read, even though he's not actually addressing a married couple in the passage, but this often gets read in married couple situations. And Paul does his best. He does his best in Corinthians 13 to explain what love looks like. He does his best to explain what love looks like. And he's kind of launching off of this idea that Jesus said this. You can bring that back up, Oceana. A new command I give you. He tells this to his disciples, and John records it for us. He says this, a new command I give you. What? Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And then read this next one with me, because I think it'll sink in a little bit. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. By this, not by your church signs or buildings, not by your doctrines, not in any other way, but by the way you love one another. Which means there must be something about the way we love people that stands out, that makes us different. Are you with me? So what does this actually look like? I think Paul actually sits down and he's wrestling with the Corinthian church a little bit here because they're having a little bit of turmoil. They've got a little bit of conflict going on. He actually at one point calls them a bunch of babies. and he sits down and he says, hang on, let me flesh out what love looks like. And he says, verse 4, love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Like it doesn't have a memory almost. There's no behaviors that, like this idea that, hey, God has taken everything we did and he's said, we're done with that. I invite you into something new, into a new future. And that we do that with one another. We're done with this, and I invite you into a new future. And then he says, love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with truth. Now, this is a little bit harder of a concept to quite understand what it is that Paul's saying. But love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in truth. And what Paul is saying here is love isn't trying to catch someone doing something wrong. Love isn't like stalking, it's prey. Love doesn't look at and say, I just know they're going to screw up and I'm going to be there when they do. Right? That love doesn't delight. They're not trying to catch evil. They're not trying to shake their finger. They're not trying to point it out. But instead, they're actually looking for opportunities to affirm amazingness around them. That they're looking for opportunities to affirm belief, to affirm good, to affirm the good that they see in others. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. You could put it this way: love is looking for an opportunity to catch people doing the right thing. Oh man, I can't wait. At some point, they're going to do it right. And I'm going to affirm that. I'm going to jump on that. I'm going to be so excited about what that could look like. Like this challenges me. Like, what if that was my stance as a parent? Those are two different stances as a parent if you think of it from a parenting perspective. What if you were always like, I'm going to see if my kids do something wrong? What are they going to do? I'm going to do something wrong. But if you're like, oh, I cannot wait, they're going to shine at some point. I'm going to make sure I'm right there, ready to build. This is a very different stance, a very different position, yes? Absolutely. And so Paul, from here, he decides to launch 4 monumentally challenging things at us, okay? This next verse, are 4 monumentally, because he uses really big, all-encompassing terms. He says this: love, it always protects. Always? It always protects? It always protects. It always trusts. Whoa, Paul. Always? Like at all times? Yeah, always. It always hopes. It always perseveres. Love is searching for a reason to give the other person the benefit of the doubt. It'll do anything it can to continue to trust and hope in the other person. It will put up with a lot. It'll really persevere. It'll really keep going, and it'll strive with a lot of things. It'll really bend and bend and bend as far as it can. In fact, the New American Standard Version puts it this way: love bears all things, believes all things, all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. This is a pretty big verse, right? This is pretty challenging. It's a very challenging verse to me. What is Paul saying here? I think Paul's saying three kind of key things right here, okay? I think he's saying that love gives the other person the benefit of the doubt. Says, okay, I'm going to just give you the benefit of the doubt. Not a big deal. We're going to move on. Love looks for the most generous, secondly, the most generous explanation for someone else's behavior. What's the most generous way? What is the way I can shine the light on them? What is the way I can understand this that leaves them in the best possible light? And third, love chooses trust over suspicion. Love chooses trust over suspicion. So let's break this down and make it uncomfortably practical. You and I, we have expectations. Raise your hand if you have expectations. I hope that's everybody in the room. Right? We all have expectations. They're bred into us. Like from the moment, and expectations are good. In fact, expectations are part of our survival. Because we gravitate to places where our expectations are met. When none of our expectations are met and things are kind of all over the board, it's really hard to feel safe. It's really hard to, right? It's really hard to feel secure. We all have expectations. We have expectations at work. Some are expectations that we have, some are expectations that work has of us, correct? We have expectations at home. We have expectations at church, in the gym, in our hobbies, friendships, neighborhoods, everywhere. But then you and I, we also have experiences. We said these are the two things that make it difficult to trust. We have experiences. And when our experiences don't line up with our expectations, there's a gap. Right? When what we experience doesn't line up with what we expect, there's a gap created. I expected this of you, I experienced this of you. I expected the project to be done at the deadline, and I experienced you missed the deadline. I don't understand. I expected you to get groceries on the way home, and you're sitting here on the couch with no groceries. I expected you to be home by 8, and you were home at 11:30. Right? There's a gap. Are you with me? And here is the thing. If you forget everything else I say today, don't forget this. Okay? If you forget absolutely everything else from this series even maybe, don't forget this. When your expectations aren't met by your experiences, and there's a gap, you have a choice as to what goes in the gap. You choose what to fill in the gap. And you might say, well, Pastor Tim, I get that, but they decided what goes in the gap by not meeting that expectation. No. Hang on. You decide what goes in that gap. You decide. You decide if they were home late, there's probably a good reason. You decide that, oh man, they must have had a really rough day at work. They didn't stop and get groceries. Oh man, something must have gone wrong in the project that they didn't expect because they didn't meet that deadline. You decide what goes in that gap. And what Paul is saying when he says love always trusts, love always hopes, love always perseveres, what Paul is saying is that when you decide what goes in that gap, when you decide what to put, you need to trust the best instead of assuming the worst. Trust the best instead of assume the worst. Are you with me? When we trust the best in someone, instead of assuming the worst, we give them the benefit of the doubt. And in fact, research actually shows that the best, healthiest relationships that we have in all of our studies actually go to ridiculous levels to believe and trust the best in the other person. Like ridiculous levels. Like, oh, there's got to be an explanation because I know them. There's got to be, I'm married to this person and I can't believe what just happened, but there must be an explanation. I know my kids, there's got to be a good explanation because this is not at all like them. And I think the fear often that we have is we fear being gullible. We fear someone taking advantage. We fear kind of feeling like a doormat. in a relationship, right? I think those are legitimate fears. But nothing is actually gained by refusing to trust in a relationship. Refusing to trust, deciding to be suspicious, deciding to kind of watch for someone to misstep, deciding to doubt someone's intentions, deciding to hang out on the edges and just say, I know they're going to screw up because that's who they are, doesn't actually help us gain anything. In fact, sometimes I get worried because in church we're really good at fear-mongering. We're really good at saying, oh, you better look out. Your neighbors are scary, right? They listen to music you shouldn't listen to. They watch movies you shouldn't be watching. Watch out for them. And I think Paul actually frames things completely differently when he says here, no. Love. If you want to love your neighbor, if you want to love your husband, you want to love your wife, you want to love your kids, you want to love your family, you want to love your friends, if you want to operate from a place of love, we choose trust over suspicion every time. All the time. Because God kind of designed us to be trust magnets, right? How many of you are like, I would love to hang out with people that are suspicious of me? No, that sounds terrible, right? How many of us want to hang out with somebody that trusts us and believes the best in us? We're wired for these kinds of relationships. The image of God in us trusts all things, hopes all things, endures all things. You choose what to put in the gap. And when we've bent all we can, there comes a moment when our experience doesn't match up with our expectations and this gap, and we're like, I want to trust, I can't. Because that happens. We hit that moment where I would love this idea of trusting all things. Right now, I'm not trusting this thing. When you can no longer trust, you must confront. When you can no longer trust, you must confront. In fact, confrontation and this kind of a situation is the one thing that Jesus actually gave like an instruction manual for. He told a lot of parables, and then at one point he's like, hang on, when you talk to one another, when you confront, let me write. And it turns out being that in chapter 18 of Matthew, right? And he says, hang on, here's how you go about it. Step 1, step 2, step 3. And I think Jesus does that because he understands the importance of relationships. He understands it so much that he says, hey, if you're at worship, if you're about to offer up an offering to God and you remember like you have something with a brother or a sister, get up, leave your stuff, hurry out the door, go make it right. Right? Go make it right. And when we come back, we're in a spot where we said, hey, my life is an offering to God. Because I'm lining it up with the way he created me to live. Jesus knows, I think, that sometimes we choose gossip over confrontation, don't we? When we don't talk to someone, we find ourselves talking about someone. Maybe you struggle and you're like, I don't want to confront, let me just talk to somebody about it and then I'll get over it. Whatever the reasoning might be, I think this is what I find myself doing. I know it's what you find yourself doing sometimes. When we don't confront, we talk about. When we don't talk to, we talk about. And it just continues to grow. So instead, confrontation is simply this. Here's what confrontation is. Ask for an explanation and assume there's a good one. Ask for an explanation, and this is where trust continues to hope, continues to persevere. Assume there's a good one. I don't know what it might be. I cannot think of it. I cannot imagine a situation where I could understand this situation. It makes no sense whatsoever. There is a really big gap here between my expectations and my experience. I need to know. I need an explanation. And I'm going to assume you have a good one. So let's talk. I'm going to bend, and when I can't bend anymore, I'm going to come to you and talk to you and not about you. And I know this is hard because it's a vulnerable moment, I am not the greatest at confrontation. But I know some people that love confrontation, and you know what? They're not very good at it. Do you know some people that are love confrontation, and they're like, oh, I can't wait. I've been developing this list, and I am going to put you in your place. Let's confront now, right? And it's like, whoa. Because they enjoy it, maybe a little too much. They actually don't understand the reason for confrontation, that confrontation is for reconciliation. When at all possible. Because when we don't confront, we conceal, don't we? When we don't confront, we conceal. We kind of bury it. We push it away. When we say, oh, I'm not going to talk to him about it. It bugs me, but I'll get over it. Oh, I'm just going to kind of move on. But when we don't ask, we conceal. And things that are concealed, what do? They grow little by little, and they grow, and they get bigger, and they get bigger and bitter. They begin to weigh on our hearts, and other things begin to knock them around, because the consequences of confrontation are far less severe than the consequences of concealment. Concealment makes it so much bigger, such a bigger deal when we don't just communicate. You don't want to be in a situation where someone was like, wow, we could have talked about this a long time ago. Most of the time, when we confront people, we get a pretty good explanation when we listen. Most of the time. Not all the time. There are those who have ill will. There are those who don't want what's best. There are those who are not pursuing a healthy relationship, right? In those categories, you get that. You know that. And hopefully, you have very distinct boundaries to preserve yourself from those situations. But those are exceptions. Most of the time, we get a pretty good explanation. Because we choose what goes in the gap, and when we don't, when we can no longer choose what goes in the gap, when we feel like we're getting forced to decide what goes in the gap, when we hit that point and we go confront, we usually get a pretty good explanation, and we're able to work things out. And this is really critical, because here's the deal. North Hills is a community, you and I, us, right? If you're visiting, we're super glad you're here. I'm going to talk to our regular attenders right now. Our church is no better than the quality of our relationships. It has nothing to do with the quality of our worship, that we want to raise that as high as possible to the excellence of God. It has nothing to do with the quality of my preaching. Praise the Lord. But I'm going to keep striving to do my best. Our church is no better than the quality of our relationships. And so it's something we work, we sweat, we cry over, we work towards this. We choose what goes in our gaps. We talk to and not about. Because our community is no better than the trust that we have for one another. What if you believed the best whenever a gap developed between what you expected and what you experienced? What if you believed the best and you assumed the best and you gave the benefit of the doubt every time there was a gap? What if we came to the defense of others when someone else assumed the worst? When someone's talking to us and they're assuming a worst, what if we came to their defense and said, whoa, hang on, I know them, I'm sure they've got a really good explanation. What if we defended one another? What if you went directly to someone who you're having a difficult time trusting and talked about it? What if you let someone know when you weren't going to meet an expectation that you knew they had? And you said, hey, I know I'm going to fall short in this expectation. It's coming. Or what if you knew you already had and you knew that you hadn't met expectations and you went to them? What if we had this pattern of, hey, listen, I didn't meet your expectations. This messed up. I need to go to you and say, hey, I'm sorry. And what if when we're confronted, what if someone needs to talk to us and say, hey, I have a gap, I'm having a difficult time? What if we just chose to be honest about our own shortcomings and vulnerabilities? People, I believe, truly want to be trustworthy and want to be with people they can trust, both. And that's what a faith community should be. That's what we work towards being. And we're going to fall. We're going to mess it up. It's going to get messy. It's going to be tough. And it's going to be worth it. In fact, what if you just incorporate this phrase into your interactions? I want to trust you. Listen, I'm having a hard time trusting you. I want to trust you, but there's a gap here, and I'm trying to reconcile it. Help me. Help me trust you. And in fact, the best way to help someone be more trustworthy is actually to trust them. Isn't that funny? Like, if you want to help your kids not be trustworthy, don't trust them with anything. And I promise they will grow up to not be trustworthy. They will take on that assumption, and they'll say, okay, let me live out into that, Mom and Dad. But if you want your kids to grow up trustworthy, then we trust them. We trust them with little things and bigger things and bigger things and bigger things, and they grow, right? In your work relationships, if you're having a difficult time trusting somebody at work, right? Being suspicious is never going to help them be more trustworthy. Going back and saying, hey, listen, there was this gap. It didn't work out, but I want you to know I'm choosing to trust you anyway. I'm going to move forward. Because that's what love does. If you are one of the people that we kind of opened up with that has a difficult time trusting, just in general, it's good to just kind of admit that. Be like, I have a hard time trusting people. Maybe you need to just say it a few times to yourself, whatever you're, maybe you need to just talk about it. I wonder why I have a hard time trusting people. But trust with one another, is critical to health. Maybe you've created, in your difficulty to trust, maybe you've created expectations that are really, really hard to meet because you like the affirmation of, see, they're not trustworthy. So I'm going to make sure I set an expectation of them that is unmeetable to reaffirm my thoughts. Maybe it's just an admission, hey, I have a hard time trusting people in general. But maybe you trust really easily. Maybe, like me, maybe you've been called gullible at times. Maybe you have a really easy time trusting. And my bet is that has led to a couple gaps that have been painful. Like sometimes being trusting is more painful than not. It's funny how what love asks of us is for us to be more vulnerable and open to being hurt. And maybe you have a relationship today and you're thinking about it and you're like, there's just been this cycle of gaps that I can't seem to fill. What is it that will break that cycle for you? Is there a phone call you need to make? Is there a person-to-person thing that you need to talk? What will it take for you to fill that gap with trust? So here's the talk and the walk. You're like, this is going to be hard. This is great, Tim, thanks. When was the last time you had to work through trusting someone? Or when was a time, not the last time? When was a time you had to work through trusting someone? And what helped you trust them more? Can you think of a time? Talk about that. We're going to have lunch. I'm excited. We're going to have our Thanksgiving lunch together. This is a good table conversation. What helps you trust people? What makes it hard to trust people? And for the walk, believe the best in all people. And when you can no longer do so, talk to them about reconciling with them again. Talk to them about the gap and say, hey, I'm sure you've got a good reason. Help me understand it. Because we all create gaps. Don't we? And trust is the critical element of really fun, safe, healthy, exciting communities and exciting relationships. Would you bow your heads with me? I'd love to pray for you, and then we've got a couple other things for you. God, thank you that you, time and time again, though we fall short, you trust us. And you paid the price for all the gaps that we created in breaking that trust. God, may we offer that same grace to one another. May we choose to trust. May we give others the benefit of the doubt. May we try and understand their situations and see things from their perspectives and just kind of work on being love to one another, God. God, I pray for our church that as a church we can continue to grow in this area, that we might continue to live love towards one another, the love that you call us to. I pray that you might be in us, that your image might shine through us, that people would look at us and our relationships with them and say, there's something different. They bend a lot. They trust in ways that I don't understand. So God, I just ask that and dedicate ourselves to you. And I ask that you be with us. I pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. With all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Serve the Lord with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my mind, and with all my strength. I will serve the Lord with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my mind, and with all my strength. With all my heart, with all my soul, with all my mind, with all my strength. I will serve the Lord with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my mind, and with all my strength. I will love you. Sing it.
I will love you.
And I will praise you.
I will praise you.
And I will serve you.
I will serve you.
And I will trust you.
I will trust you.
And I will love you.
I will love you.
And I will praise you.
I will praise you.
And I will serve you.
I will serve you.
And I will trust you, Lord. With all my heart, with all my soul, with all my mind, with all my strength. With all my heart, with all my soul, with all my mind, with all my strength. I will serve the Lord with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my mind, and with all my strength. I will love you, Lord, with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my mind, and with all my strength. I will love you, Lord, with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my mind, and with all my strength.